Why do we fight? Well, we've read about conflict in general in the favelas in Brazil, the gang fighting, the American grand militarism in the world, or the total warfare of the ancient Greeks, but also in very mundane things of everyday life. For example, splitting up with your partner or divorce. But the ancient Greeks have something or two to teach us, and I think Thucydides in particular is going to be the man to do it. He is an expert on conflict, having written the history of the Peloponnesian War, which is the history between the war between Athens and Sparta, which was a 24-year war. And he believes that the war began because of fear. Okay? Let's just start like that. The Athenians becoming great and arousing fear in the Spartans compelled them to war. Okay. Now, the fact is that Thucydides looks at any interaction in a game theoretic way. And what is game theory? Game theory is a mathematical theory of interaction. And of course, Thucydides didn't use calculus or algebra, but he had a proto-game theoretic perspective on the world, where he saw people's behavior intertwined. And I'll show you how. So let's first look at the first battle and how King Archidamos, the king of the Spartans, he invaded Attica. And this is modern Europe. Of course, transport yourself 2,500 years ago. Imagine, eliminate these highways, pretend it's ancient Greece. There we go. So we have Athens on the right, and we have Sparta in the south of the Peloponnesus. And we have the route which Archidamos took to invade Attica, or the region of Athens, of the city of Athens. Now, what we first would imagine is that he went as quickly as possible to make it a surprise attack. But in fact, no. He went very slowly. He lethargically marched his troops up through the Peloponnesus, through the Corinthian Isthmus, dallied around the garrison of Onoi, and then finally settled in one of the largest districts around the city, the garrisoned wall, or the wall of Athens, in the district of Acharnae, okay, and which you see with the red dot. And the blue dot is Athens, the walled city of Athens. Now, this is apparently, from what Thucydides tells us, was not atypical. Spartans were in fact very cautious people. And the Corinthians, who were part of the Spartan League, before the war, actually went to Sparta and told the Spartans, you alone of the Greeks pursue a passive policy. And this was a reproach. Now, in this first invasion, is Archidamos actually being lazy, or is it a clever tactic? Let's try and analyze this. So, in fact, Archidamos did this on purpose. Acharnae, the district in which he encamped his troops, is in a high position. So it's on the hilltops near the valley of where the walled city is. And he knew that the entire city, all the citizens in the city, would be able to see him, and he was visible. His entire encampment was visible to all the people in the urban center. Of course, all the people who were in the urban center were not only the urban citizens, but also the rural citizens who had evacuated the rural areas, including Acharnae, to take refuge inside of the city walls. So now, you have all of the Athenians staring back at each other. And this turns into a staring match, because Archidamos seems not to be doing anything. So what are Archidamos' preferences? What are his options? Archidamos can either stay where he is, and do nothing, and simply ravage the local land, burn a bit of crops here, destroy some property there, but nothing that will exhaust his troops at all. Or he can go on a full-on ravaging campaign, invade the plains of Attica near the city walls, and try to take the city and bash his head against those huge walls, and actually exhaust all of his resources and waste his time and exhaust his army. So Archidamos prefers to be passive than to be aggressive, no matter what the Athenians choose to do. Because if the Athenians choose to come out even when he's passive, the Spartans have the lead on the battlefield. They are the most formidable infantry in Greece. No one beats them on land. So we call passive behavior D and aggressive behavior E, and D is preferred to E. And of course, when I mean passive, it's more of a passive-aggressive. Okay, it's like, you know, don't make me hurt you. So I'm going to show you how the Athenians felt watching Archidamos sitting there at Akarnai. So what I need you to do is not to tell your neighbor and simply look at this image, and it's an experiment, okay? And here we go. What do you see? Who sees a young lady? Lift up your hand. Great, look around. No, lift up your hand, keep it up, and look around. There are a lot of people who can't see the young lady. You probably see an old lady, right? So this is exactly how the Athenians felt. They were collectively indifferent about what perspective to take. Half of the population wanted to vote to go out and charge against the Spartans, especially the Acarnanians, who were the largest district and the greater number of the people inside of the city. And the rest of the Athenians wanted to stay inside the walls. And this collective indifference we call, therefore, B. So the Athenian preferences, we have, no matter what the Spartans do, B is indifference. However, if the Spartans are aggressive, the best possible choice for the Athenians to make is to stay behind the walls and let the Spartans use their resources, waste their resources, and exhaust their infantry. And the worst possible decision is to actually go out and fight against them because they will most likely lose given the formidableness of their army. So if we put these two preferences together, both of the Athenians and of Archidamos, we see that we have Archidamos. If he is passive, the Athenians are indifferent, so BB. And if Archidamos is aggressive, the Athenians always prefer to be passive, A over C. Got that? In the case of the Athenians, if the Athenians are passive, Archidamos prefers to be passive to aggressive. And if they are aggressive, the Archidamos prefers to be passive to aggressive. So no matter what the Athenians do, he always prefers to be passive. He doesn't want to exhaust his troops or waste resources. Okay, so this is the matrix formulation, and these are the four possible outcomes that Archidamos, this is all in the plans of Archidamos, that Archidamos envisions is going to happen. So what is he going to do about this? He says, well, everybody is going to act in their own self-interest. And so what he thinks to himself is, one, I prefer to be passive if they're passive. I prefer to be passive if they're aggressive. Therefore, I'm going to be passive. No matter what, that's my dominant strategy. Those are my best choices. I put a star next to it. Now, the Athenians, he says to himself, are going to think in the following way. If I'm passive, they're going to be confused, and they are going to be split in their vote because they are a democracy. They're a collective decision maker. They're not one king. They're a collective number of people taking a decision. And therefore, passive and aggressive, they're indifferent between that. However, if he's aggressive and comes against the city walls, most certainly they will take up the passive position and barricade themselves behind the walls. And then we can star those best choices as well. And in that case, the Athenians, let's just go back to that. In that case, the Athenians have a weakly dominant strategy. So they prefer most of the time to be passive. But there is a potential for error, right? So, what do we do with this information of these best choices? Where these best choices intersect, we say that these are the most likely outcomes, okay? And this is what Archidamos did. He was trying to force the hand of the Athenians by being passive to make the mistake to actually charge them in a battlefield that they would be more likely to lose. And so when I ask you, were they lazy or clever, you should think to yourself, obviously clever. Very clever tactic on the part of Archidamos. Now, this type of civil strife, okay, that Archidamos had created within Athens is something that is not only typical within states, but also happens within unions, confederacies, and leagues, and anything that requires membership, okay? And this was the case of Milos. The Athenian League, okay, wanted Milos to stay within the Athenian Empire. They wanted them to be part of the Athenian League. And the Melians said, we don't want to be part of your league. Okay? So they had a very exiter attitude. They wanted to exit the league. Now, the Athenians, they were afraid that if the Melians didn't stay within the league, that it would create a contagion effect where all the other members would say to themselves, well, if they're not joining, why should we? Maybe we should leave. And so they said to the Melians, you have the choice. We need you to be in the league. And we need you to accept our offer. And our offer is the following. You will have to pay us tribute and submit to our regulatory control, our jurisdiction, okay, which usually meant the Athenian courts. And of course, the Melians said, this is unfair. We don't think this is fair. This is a very similar situation to what is going on in the UK today. The analogy is not perfect, but it still is very well mimicked, in the sense that the UK has been offered by the EU to stay within the membership and simply pay 8 to 9 million pounds as part of their membership, and to also submit to the regulatory control of the ECJ. To which the UK said, that's unfair. And what happens then? The thing is, it's not that the offer is unfair, it's that the consequences of rejecting that offer are going to be far worse. And this is what the other members of the league are trying to argue. So in the case of the Athenians, the Athenians say to the Melians, look, if you reject our offer, we're going to destroy your city, enslave your women and children, kill all the men in the city, and recolonize your entire territory. Not a very good outcome. So, you know, some tribute, let them rule us, instead of everybody getting killed. In the case of the UK, the Europeans have said that they will deny single market access to Britain, which will severely and seriously damage the financial sector, the City of London, especially given that the UK is a service-run economy. That the national tax contributions of those immigrants, of those European immigrants, is a big chunk, and they would be losing out on that. And the added bonus that there would be military alienation, given that they would be separate from the bloc from the military bloc of the EU. And so, very negative outcomes. Now, so what is the negotiation? What's going on? So although these are the offers, and this is the offer, and we can either accept or reject, what's going on behind the scenes? What is the rhetoric? So what's really going on is that there's a realist rhetoric, okay, on the side of the Athenians as well as the EU, which is simply possible actions are defined by what the strong do and the weak accept. So if you're little, get with the program, okay? And on the side of the Melians, just as the UK, there is a extreme rhetoric of fairness and justice, and this is, This is something that we should do that requires that we think ethically and morally. These are the idealists. And in this case, this is why we hear Theresa May talk about her slogan, and she's been vilified time and time again for saying no deal is better than a bad deal. But this is very much in line, okay, this attitude towards Brexit is very much in line with the attitude that Yanis Varoufakis had with the Grexit crisis. In fact, Yanis Varoufakis wrote an entire monograph, a book, about the situation that they had with the Troika, and he entitled it the very same quote of the Melians as a reproach to this realist perspective. He called it, "And the weak suffer what they must." And in fact, it says, "And the weak suffer what they must?" Should they? So this is the situation. We've seen that fear begins competition and conflict. We see that honor is a desire for fairness, and that self-interest is a desire to acquire things. And Thucydides kind of summarizes this strategy of coalition or this strategy of empire in one sentence. The Athenian ambassadors come to Sparta before the war, long before the war, and they come and they say, well, and I'm going to read it off here, "There is nothing remarkable or contrary to human behavior in what we have done. Just because we accepted an empire when one was offered and then declined to let it go, overcome by the strongest of all motives, honor, fear, and self-interest." So honor is the need for fairness, fear compels us to fight, and self-interest is the desire to acquire. I have designed a game theoretic model that tries to incorporate these three ideas in a networked analysis. And then I computer simulated it, and I'm going to show you this computer simulation today. So here, I've only included one of the elements in the simulation. So we have fear, so compelled to fight. And the number of resources of each node, okay, and each of these nodes are the major states in the 5th century BC. Okay, at the time of the Peloponnesian War, and how they interacted. And hegemony was reached, so Spartan hegemony was reached very quickly. And here you see Sparta in Laconia, which is the lower node called Laconia. That's just the region where Sparta is. This is very unrealistic because hegemonies are not acquired so quickly. In this case, I've added the costs of war because Thucydides explicitly tells us that war is more is less about weapons and arms than it is about money. And the word he uses for money is dapane. And dapane just means cost and expenditure. So what we have to do is that we have to add the costs of war. So every time I go to war with somebody, it costs me something. And if we include this, we find, in fact, that given the parameters of the time, we create the two leagues. We find that the brown stabilizes in the Peloponnesian League, and the blue, which is on the left-hand side, and the blue stabilizes on the Athenian League on the right. What I do next is that I include the idea of fairness to make it even more realistic. So now each state has the opportunity to decide if it wants to exit the union or not. If we do this by having the initial state be the two leagues, the Peloponnesian League, the Spartan League, and the Delian League, the Athenian League, that Sparta actually takes over and creates a hegemony, even though there are defections throughout and exits. Of course, if I let this simulation keep on going, the defections would continue. But the idea that hegemony is still, we can still arrive at hegemonic states or coalitional states, even though there are exits, is very heartening. And so, and this is what actually did happen in 404 BC when Athens falls and Sparta takes over most of ancient Greece. So is all conflict destructive? Well, I contend that it's not. There's a lot of friendly conflict. For example, that you can use your fake Jedi sabers when you're playing tennis in London. Or you can have two guys actually wrestling on a vase. And athletic competition is simply a friendly version of the more serious version of war. And what we can do is simply just keep rolling with the punches. Thank you.